This lesson is about Sydney's social history, and by the end of the lesson, I want you to be able to outline a brief history of Sydney and then explain how that history has affected Sydney's spatial patterns of population and also land use. So let's have a look at some important dates of Sydney's history. Obviously, it's a long history. Certainly before 1788, Aboriginal people used Sydney simply because of deep harbour. It was a good source of food, as well as shelter, and there would have been certainly Aboriginal farming methods used in the area. But on the 24th of January 1788, the first fleet arrived at Botany Bay with roughly around 1,480 people. They arrived, as you can see, at Botany Bay. A lot of people think they found Sydney Cove straight away. That wasn't true, and it wasn't until 2 days later that they realised they were in the wrong place. They relocated to Sydney Cove. Funny enough, on the same day, they actually saw the French fleet as well. That somehow disappeared into the pages of history, and Australia became obviously a British colony. And that's something to remember, that Sydney was not built or discovered as a place for a city. It was for a penal colony, and that really affects the first 50 years of Sydney's development. Remember, when we're talking about urban dynamics, we need to remember that we're talking about cities. And at this time in history, around 1788, London and Paris were the main centres of the world. Britain's just taken over the world with its empire, so London is still the main world city. In 1823, Sydney has its first council. Now, you might be thinking, why is that important? Well, before that, important decisions were made by the governor. That governor was sent by British Parliament. In 1823, a group of people who had been living in Sydney started recognising the need for decisions to be made by people in the local area. Now, councils, they were needed to build roads, arrange marketplaces and times, build sewage treatment sites, be able to provide fresh water, and obviously get a police force together. Remember, these guys started from scratch, and they wanted to do it properly, and that's why Sydney's first council came around in 1823. Now, in 1842, Sydney became a city. Now, you might think, oh, that's Australia's first city. It isn't. Adelaide was the first city in 1840. It was settled by free settlers. There were no convicts actually sent to Adelaide. Sydney became a city in 1842. Why was that important? Well, it means significantly it was an important place for trade, migration, and as it became city status, more money was given to Sydney because it was a city. In 1869, Sydney builds its first town hall, and it's in George Street. It remains in George Street up to the 1970s. Around 1870, Sydney's population was 135,000. That's huge in terms of cities around the world. London around that time is about 1 million. To give you some sort of context, and remember, the only way to get to Sydney was by boat. Then in 1901, we see a demolition of slum areas in the rocks as a result of the council getting together and realising that these horrible slum conditions weren't working, so they got rid of slum areas in the rocks. And then after World War II, brought a big influx of overseas migration to Sydney. Now, how does the movement of people affect spatial patterns? Well, basically, Sydney's history, the more wealthier people moved to the east of Sydney Cove, so Government House, where it is now, the Opera House, that was considered a rich area, and the poor people moved to the west of Sydney Cove, which is the rocks. The wealthier people were the ones who arrived here as free settlers, government workers, and what they did, they established new businesses or worked for the government in a colony. They were better well off, and that's why they located in the east, because they were close to their work. Upper people moved here because they were skilled labourers such as whalers, potters, builders and labourers. Interestingly enough, the reason why Mosman became such an important place was because there was a person who came over here and established Mosman was in fact a whaler, and there was a whaling port, and that's why it was really important. So people who moved over here moved to specific areas. If you were rich, you moved to East Sydney Cove, and if you weren't so rich, you moved to the west. As a result, it gave the foundation of population patterns, which what we see now.